Hi, everybody. I'm Gary Caton in Southwest Virginia, and I'm with Sylvia in upstate New York. And
Hello, everyone. It's so good to see everyone. It's been a while, Gary. Thank you for
yeah,
taking the
yeah,
time.
you bet. Yeah, I'm really like in my hermit's cave doing my writing these days, but there's so much going on at this point. Some really big, really rare alignments, and we have the sun going into the sign of Cancer at the summer solstice. And so it just felt like a really good time to stop and pause and check in with people and talk about this ingress and this solstice because, the solstice is such a sacred time. Um, here in the mountains on my farm, everything is so green and it's been a wet spring, and so we've had this huge um, growth, and the flowers are blooming, and you have this sort of peak of the and it's amazing, each year I notice like after the solstice you can start to see already the leaves. People think of the leaves turning in the fall, but you can see very soon after the solstice, some of the flowers start to turn brown, and the real vibrant greenness that was part of spring. There's a shift, and in a lot of pagan traditions, this is why this particular turning of the wheel holiday was marked by like a sacrificial theme of like the one king is sacrificed and another king takes over. So there's like the hanged man in the tarot, because what's happening is the sun is at its highest point in the northern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
It's farthest north. So the days are the longest. There's this influx of energy that's been building, and now we're at the peak. And from here, we're going to get shorter and darker until the winter solstice.
You touched upon something, Gary, that I was thinking about in the last few years that I'm feeling more, of the elements, that the longest day, it is truly the sun governing, the sun shining longer time. The sun is, the active energy, it's the life force. And for lack of, we don't want to, it's the masculine energy.
Yang, yeah,
It's
it's
the yang energy, it's the energy that is,
fire, yang, like,
yeah, fire, doing, active. And as you said, nature is so active and producing,
yeah,
so producing on all elements, giving its all. And then it starts rounding down like every cycle of life, right? Peak reaches peak and then goes down into
yeah.
contraction. And that's exactly what you described. Yes.
So this is like the midlife crisis of the year.
Yeah. Oh my God. We could talk about that and how us giving so much and getting tired immediately starts showing in our eyes, in our skin. Of course, it's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy available at this time. We have Jupiter has gone into Cancer, and that's a very expansive energy, but it's in a very harsh square aspect to Saturn in Aries, which is a very restrictive and a very demanding energy.
Yes, talk to us a little bit about it because I was writing about this and I felt it's very strong. The two squares, there's going to be two upcoming squares, right? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is the final square of Jupiter to Saturn. But really, and we can pull up the chart here in a minute, but what we have is we have Jupiter squaring Saturn and Neptune. And the sun and Jupiter in early Cancer squaring Saturn and Neptune in early Aries. So we have four squares, really. between those, and that's a lot of, friction between cardinal fire, Aries cardinal fire, like just get like that early spring of like, let's get out of the darkness, let's get going, let's leave the season of quiet and inactivity behind and let's go, right? So you might be feeling this tremendous urge to just leave something behind, and there's this really expansive energy in can with Jupiter and Cancer that's saying, yeah, and not just that, but more and more and more. And it can be easy to kind of get ahead of yourself and overdo and wear yourself out, you know?
Yes, it's so very true. I am, just to share a little bit of a personal account, I'm right now experiencing a Jupiter return. So the Jupiter in Cancer is right on top of my natal
Wow.
Jupiter in Cancer, a few degrees away in between 10 and 11th house, depending which system you use. And I have experienced literally the feeling or the perception. I have experienced multiple ocean layers coming in my life from different communities, each one asking for their own demands of my loyalty. Like,
Wow.
Sylvia, are you going to do this for us? Are you going to do this for us? You la, 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 la. And I was like, whoa. It was an oceanic influx in my life
Wow.
of different communities. And so that is a lesson that, popular astrology of what we're keep repeating from this, cosmopolitan, writings of it, the popular astrology. Jupiter, glorifies everybody, everything it touches. No, it depends. The
There's such
energy,
a thing as too much of a good thing, There is.
yes.
Yeah.
And also where it is located on your chart. What does it mean for you? Your own level of development, your own understanding of Jupiter, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For
That's
lack
a
of better
really
word.
good point too. Like for me, I don't have a lot of squares or oppositions in my chart, but the one square that I have is a very close square. It's literally 0 degrees, 1 minute of orb, and it's Jupiter to Neptune. So
Mm.
this Jupiter square to Neptune right now is I'm going to especially feel that because I have Jupiter square Neptune in my natal chart, and so there's this conflict between, Jupiter tends to be very active and wanting to be like well, for a male it would show up as wanting to be like a father figure and being involved in the community and sort of, having your hands in many pies, so to speak, and so on, right? And Jupiter was very much like that. I mean, I love the way that you talked about, um, Jupiter's of many affairs, love affairs, eh, or worse, they were characterized as rape, many times, and how that could be if you take that instead of taking it literally, if you take it more symbolically, it's a symbol of just like this irrepressible urge of nature. It's like, sort of like this irrepressible erotic urge of nature to just grow and be fertile, you know?
And I have something to offer here that I received this insight and I want your opinion. Jupiter cycle is about 12 years, right?
Yes.
12 years of age is the first sexual awakening. More 12 years, 12 and 12 is 24, is the second sexual awakening. Every 12 years, and then add 12 years to that, is the age of now, usually in our culture, people have children. And then more 12 years is the time of where the sexual cycle starts changing and closing. So the
Especially for
fertility,
women. Yeah.
exactly. So the fertile energy of Jupiter is this is the correlation that not only Venus is about our sexuality, Jupiter is about our physical, it's about the physical cycles of sexual awakening and sexual development. And
Yeah.
that's why Jupiter cannot be seen as a man who was going around raping women. That is a human projection, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's, it's kind of like, and I think we talked about it, like the idea of Saturn eating the children is really, when you think about it in Kabbalistic terms, like in the Kabbalah, Saturn is at the top of the world tree. So there's this sort of high astral, beyond the astral, really this high archetypal energy plane where as soon as an idea comes into being, it gets reabsorbed back into the archetypes. And there's no there's nothing being birthed from that. It's just this pure place of connection to with oneness. And so as soon as an idea manifests, and if the idea is seen as the child, it's eaten, it's reabsorbed back into the archetypes, and so what we have right now is we have that energy of Saturn that can be like this sort of really remote, inaccessible, archetypal plane of things that are difficult to even manifest, difficult to even touch or connect with. And then you have Jupiter, which is the super fertile, wanting to just have many children and that you can see the tension between those two things is extreme,
Hmm. hmm
and
hmm
yeah. So
and one more question I have for you regarding the squares. Um, Many times for me, at least at the first quadrants, and we eventually have to explain that a little bit, but at the beginning of its entry, energetic entry, Jupiter and Neptune many times for me have a mutual reception. So Neptune. Yeah, Neptune and Jupiter, the expansive feeling that Jupiter brings, the oceanic feeling Jupiter in Cancer, can be confused many times with, it's very similar to Neptune in Pisces.
sure, yeah, 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 absolutely. And
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
I mean, they were brothers,
Yes,
The
yes.
difference between Jupiter and Neptune is mythologically, Neptune was swallowed by Saturn. Jupiter was not. And Jupiter and Hades, sorry, Neptune and Hades, Pluto, were both swallowed. And then Jupiter was the fortunate one that didn't get swallowed. And he, kind of punched the old man in the gut and forced him to cough up the brothers. But then, now they say in the mythology, it says they threw lots to see who would get what. But I grew up with two brothers. I can tell you right now, Jupiter said to his brothers, "Hey, you two suckers were swallowed by the old man. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have nothing. So I'm taking the best spot up on Mount Olympus, and you two can figure it out."
Yeah, exactly. And yesterday, Gary, I thought of you and all my friends who love nature because I was driving around 1:30 p.m. in the foothills of the Mohonk Mountain,
Mm,
and there was a thunderstorm. I have never seen something like this. There
mm.
was a thunderstorm. I was in the foothills of the mountain, grayish thunder. There are some pictures on the internet that people took in the area. Thunder, rainbow at the same time. And
Wow.
up the hill, it all cleared up, and there was thunder in the bright sunshine. I've
Wow.
never seen something like that.
Incredible.
It was like Jupiter and Neptune together. I'm like, this is it. Like this is it. Jupiter
Wow.
and Neptune
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Because because Jupiter is like, yeah, let's do more. Let's more community, more, everything more pleasure, more love, more vastness. And then Neptune is where it all comes to be a little, what's the word I'm trying to use? Some people experience paranoia with Neptune because it's so psychedelic. And so they lose kind of like the between reality and myth or fantasy.
Yes, yes.
And it's like,
That's a
oh,
very
yeah,
common phase of psychedelic experience is that
yeah.
um, it becomes, it's overwhelming. You become overwhelmed with the oneness, like it's too much oneness. So there's this overwhelm that comes with and if you think about it, I mean, like if you've ever been out on the ocean,
Mm.
you lose sight of land. That's a little bit, concerning because it's like you ain't swimming back no more.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're stuck out here and with a lot of big things that can eat you and monsters and in
And
the mythology
thunderstorms and
dragons and thunder.
winds.
Yeah, yeah, and so they both have that in common that they can be very overwhelming. And if you think about it, like, you know, the sea is not some place where you can live, in a permanent way. You can be on a ship and you can have the life of a sailor, but you got to go to port, and you
To
can't just stay out on this.
replenish, yeah,
Yeah,
plugging back to the earth,
in the
connect with
same
the
way,
earth.
I mean, there's mountains up there where you live, Mount Washington, sadly claims the lives of people every year, and it's not even in the Rocky Mountains. That's the Appalachian Mountains. But I mean, I've been on Mount Washington in the summertime, but I know that, you really have to know your stuff to go up that mountain in the winter.
Yes, yes. People, I'm considered like very close to the city. There is this ever conflict of the upstaters. They're like, oh, the area you're in is city, is not upstate because there is further upstate, the
Yeah, no, yeah.
Adirondacks.
Mount
And they're
Washington's like even over a couple states over is what I'm talking about.
right.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful. The Adirondacks are made of crystal. They are made of crystal. But talking about the natural, because I know we have the expression in Greek, physiolatris meaning nature lover,
Mm.
worshiping Mother Nature.
Yes, tree huggers.
Uh, exactly. And so the elements of nature have been overwhelming and strong, powerful. The
Mm.
wind is strong, the thunder is being strong, the rain. It
Yeah.
feels like a jungle right out here, which brings me to the question that I wanted to ask you for the little time we have. That tell us a little bit about the solstice. What is astrologically the solstice?
Yeah,
And
so that's
yeah,
what you're talking about is this like influx of energy. I mean, that's the nature of cardinal signs. Cardinal signs begin a new season. So we're about to begin summer officially, right? And Aries is the beginning of spring. So this rush of energy at the beginning of a season. But the problem is we have two different cardinal signs trying to rush, but in different ways. There's this cardinal water and there's this cardinal fire. And fire and water are very opposite, right? Water is cool and wet. Fire is hot and dry. And so they don't share a quality. They're very opposite. And so you have to have like in order to for those two the alchemy to happen, you have to have a strong container. You have to have like a metal pot that you can hold the water in and then allow the fire to gently, slowly heat the water. Otherwise, the water's either going to put out the fire or the
and that's the work of Mars, and that's the work of the planets that are closer to the Earth. Of is what the gods gave to humans to contain the elements, which was metal. Take metal, put it into fire, melt it, create a container to hold the wood
right.
burning, to
And
hold the
psychologically,
charcoal. Yeah,
sorry, didn't mean to
yeah, yeah.
interrupt you there.
No, no, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and psychologically, that strong container is, of course, the ego. And people talk about ego in culture terms. Somebody, oh, that person's got a lot of ego. They mean that they have like a sort of a strong personality, but a strong ego in psychological terms is actually you need a strong ego in order to transcend the ego because only a strong ego can will be able to handle that oceanic influx of energy that comes from a true state of true oneness. And so that strong container that we need is strong boundaries, strong sense of self, um, strong grounding in some kind of spiritual practice or spiritual tradition. All of these things are going to be really helpful when we have this friction between these two cardinal signs. Um, I'm going to pull up the chart because it sounded like you
Yes,
asked
please
me,
go ahead.
and we can have
Yes, I
a
have
look.
exactly until noon.
Okay. So let's see. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So,
Maybe I don't know if I can make it a little bigger. Yes, perfect.
Cancer. Oh, so here we go. There we go. So this is set.
That's such a beautiful, Gary, it looks like a crown. Do you see it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a series of sextiles and trines that are surrounding this square. So you can see these red lines in the middle. That's those series of squares. So
Yeah,
Sun and Jupiter in early Cancer, square Saturn and Neptune in early Aries. And then
yeah.
what's interesting is exactly at the middle of that square, we find Venus.
Ah, beauty.
And then on either side of that square, we find Mars and Pluto making sextiles. So there's a couple different things. You have a trine with Mercury in the North Node, and you have these sextiles with Mars and Pluto. So there's a sort of harmony that's surrounding this really tense square, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also a harmony right in the middle, exactly at the middle of all of these squares. We find Venus, and Venus is at 15 degrees of Taurus, which is like the Beltane, point.
Mm-hmm.
So really
Mm-hmm.
what we have is like three places on the wheel of the year being activated at the same time. And that's really very powerful. And so what's funny about that is when I saw this, I thought, oh, maybe we can have like because, Cancer ingress is the beginning of summer and Venus is right in the middle. I thought, well, maybe we can have like a summer of love.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to check and see what was going on in 1967 at the Cancer ingress when we had the summer of love?
Oh
And
my God, it was a cancer one.
well, the Summer of Love was announced earlier that year, but
Mm-hmm.
if we look at the beginning of summer,
Mm-hmm.
what we find is that there was a full moon
Mm.
at the beginning of summer, and then you can see Venus and Mars were in a sextile relationship. So here's
Mm.
the lovers, Venus and
The
Mars,
lovers in
and and
conversation,
they're in a
yeah.
harmonious relationship. And right at the midpoint is the Uranus Pluto. And so there's this revolution of what? Of love.
Right. Yes.
And I was like, oh my goodness. And then right at the midpoint of the Sun and Venus, we see Mercury. So there's this message of love. And a lot of people came from all over the country to be there in San Francisco because of this message of a summer of love, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, wow. And notice that Venus, where is she? She's at the middle of a fixed sign. So once again, you have this idea that the 0 degrees of cardinal signs and then the 15 degrees of the fixed signs. These are the world axis.
Uh-huh.
And so what you have here is you have the beginning of Cancer being activated, the beginning of Capricorn with the moon, and then you have Venus in the middle of the fixed sign activating what we call the cross quarter point. So
Yes.
now remember, this wasn't a summer of love for everybody everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There was the Vietnam War was still going on. There was still, you know, life still happened. But there was this um, sort of refuge in time where people were focused on peace and love as a way of being, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the one thing that I would invite people to consider with this alignment. Um,
Wow, that's a lot of activity.
yeah, I mean, there's literally four squares, and Venus is at the middle of all of them, you know?
Of course, the queen is in the middle of all of it. Makes total sense to me.
So
And yeah.
yeah, and it's Venus in Taurus, so
Oh,
that
yeah.
idea that we talked about, you mentioned really, really poignantly earlier, we don't necessarily need the chart at the moment to go back into discussion. Um, the idea that about, people tend to think of Venus very much as in terms of sexuality, but reminding people it's also Jupiter. So Jupiter in Cancer and Venus in Taurus, like speaking to one another, that's a very strong, sensual, but it's sensual. Venus in Taurus is very sensual. Like, um, I was outside the other day, taking a break from my writing and just feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and hearing the birds singing, it's like, oh, it's like plugging your battery into a charger. For me, it was like that was like, okay, all right, even though it was only like 5 minutes, I was just able to go out. I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back and do some more work, and that sensual connection with nature, Venus and Taurus, and then Jupiter in Cancer. The other thing that I think is an emotional um, quality there. It's a very strong emotional and and connections to the past. Cancer is very emotional, very protective, very connected with the past and with tradition and wanting to like have a family and and feel like that people are nurturing one another. So there's this sensuality but also this nurturing quality between the two of those. That's with Venus in her rulership and Jupiter in his exaltation. I mean, there's a lot of energy there to sort of focus on. That's not going to be this um, you know, I mean, there's multiple wars going on, and you know, here's another thing to consider. It's possible that Venus in the middle of that square could bring peace to those wars. Now, I'm not predicting that. It's possible. Um, but but even if that doesn't happen, what's definitely possible is that each one of us can choose where we're going to focus our attention. And it's interesting, John Lennon famously, rather than being anti-war, there was this anti-war movement in the 60s. John Lennon realized when you say no war, you're still talking about war. Let's be pro-peace.
Yes, 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 yes.
So he was a
And
peace
yes,
activist. Let's be pro-peace. Let's be pro-love. Let's be pro-nurturing. Let's be sensual nature. Focus on what you want and
let's focus on
and not
love.
being reactive against the things that you don't want because, you know, um, by resisting something, you're actually giving your energy to it in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Acting out of reaction. out of a bouncing back of an energy. A simple example we have in psychology and constellation is that, okay, I'm running away from my parents all my life. If you're running away from your parents or your family or whatever is
You're
the
still defined by them.
exactly that's it. But there is one thing I want to say about Venus in Taurus, in exactly mid Taurus, and how potent is this placement is in the time of the ancient Knossos in Crete, of where the symbol of Taurus, the bull, in that society in the
Yeah.
Mediterranean was very big, the age of Taurus. Taurus is something that a lot of people forget about Venus and or is being, how can I say, it's been ignored, is that the woman that was holding the scales, the Libra scales, is Venus. Is Venus that is holding the scales of justice.
Mm.
So Venus in the middle of Taurus. Taurus is the two horns, the face of the bull, the energy of the bull. It is a lot about earth, and Taurus is very important for Taurus to feel good in their bodies.
Hmm.
They need to be fed. Everybody needs to be fed. Community needs to be fed. The earth needs to be okay. We need to cultivate the food in the right way. Everybody needs to be included. Everybody needs to have food. There needs to be balance of water. There needs to be balance of the elements. Earth, fire, water, steam. For the ecosystem to be
Mm.
balanced, we need to be in balance. And so this midpoint of Venus in Taurus is really the queen sitting in that throne of the earth element, of the
Mm.
earth throne, in a sense of we are making decisions right now. And so we're making decisions about starting from our love life, our sexuality, our sensuality, becoming more conscious of how this is affecting the people around us. And as you said, instead of Taurus is not like running out unless we have the bull in the china shop, which is in interaction with Mars. Is not going out to protest, but he's sitting there thinking and contemplating what is the next step.
Munching on some nice green grass, chilling
Eh,
out. One of the things I like best about evolutionary astrology, their take on Taurus is that Taurus is about simplicity. You know,
mhm.
it's like, in other words, it's very Taoist, and so, there's a Taoist concept of like, many times the best thing to do about a situation is nothing. Allow the situation to breathe, give it some time, let it work itself out, and it will come to its own equilibrium. But if you keep messing with it, you just keep bouncing it, and it never settles down into a place of its own natural harmony. So there's this Taoist concept of non-ado. The simplest solution to any problem is to do nothing, to wait and see. You know what I'm saying? Now, there are some problems you can't afford to do nothing. There's
Take
certain things
action.
that you have to take action. And then, but again, the simplest, and this is why, I maintain very strongly that astrology is not a science, but it doesn't mean it's an art, but it doesn't mean we can't be methodical. And so, for instance, the simplest thing, and we can use scientific principles. Scientific principles would be like if something is a mess and you have to do something, the smartest thing to do is pick one part of that mess and address it.
Start from
Because
a point.
if you
Start from
change
somewhere.
if you change five or six things all at once and it's still a mess, you don't know which of those five or six things worked and which one didn't. You pick one thing and you change it a little bit, and if it seems like it's helping, you keep going. If it doesn't, pick another thing. That's simplicity. So keeping things simple, keeping things practical, that's also very Taurus. you know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the next question I would have for you, and before our closing, is, and then I wanted to share a little bit about talismans, and we return to that later. But what if, and I know we never talk in terms of predictions, but what do you feel this energy after this solstice and the moon that is coming in Cancer season? What do you feel is like the message or your sense of energy that it's gonna?
You know, this is something that I hope to write about on Substack pretty soon, and so people can look for an article about that. There's two things, Sylvia. One thing is that Venus has, as a morning star, she has made her peak of separation from the sun, what we call maximum elongation. So now she's going to begin to become lower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think this is a time of that's a metaphor for going within. You know, the Queen Inanna, even though she was queen of heaven, you know, she was the most powerful person. You know, she was the queen, but it says she turned her ear from the great above to the great below.
Mm,
So even being the most powerful person, being a queen, wasn't enough. She had to go within to find the depths of her being. She had completed, and it's similar to the tarot, you know, the first line of the tarot where you have the Empress and the Emperor, for instance, right? And the mother and the father, and then you have the teacher, the Hierophant. These are people that we learn how to be adults from, you know? And then it's our turn. We get married and then we learn to drive the chariot, you know? We learn to steer our own lives through. No matter how successful you are with that, the next line comes the hermit and the hanged man. You have to go within because there's a whole nother dimension of being that is about the inner life. And so Venus is heading into that phase now where she's going to begin to go down and so again, you know, this idea of like being involved in protests or whatever. I mean, strictly from a Venus point of view, this is not about a worldly action anymore. She's going into this phase of exploring the inner worlds, more like the hermit and the hanged man. Um, and then the other thing that stands out to me is like this Saturn, and this is something that I want to write more about on Substack too. I'm hoping both of these things that I'm just briefly mentioning here will turn into Substack articles pretty
mm-hmm.
soon. Um, Saturn Neptune in the beginning of Aries. I mean, this is the beginning of something big. And if you
Mm,
think about like in terms of culture, we are now in, not in terms of astrological ages, but in terms of like, cultural ages. We're in what they call the age of information.
mm-hmm.
And another way of talking about this is like they talk about it's the third industrial revolution. You had like the
Mm-hmm.
steam engine, and then you had like railroads and steel, and then you had computers. Right? And now we're coming into what some people are saying might be what's called the age of imagination, where it's not so much about having the ability to manipulate the information. We have so much ability to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of incredible tools available to us. It's having the imagination to know what to do with those tools. And
Yes.
there's like, I was doing, this writing that I'm doing right now. I have to do a lot of mini biographies of people, and I was reading about this guy in the 1920s, like not like only a couple decades after the very first airplane flew, the Wright brothers. This guy wrote a book and said, we already have the technology to fly to space. We could do it, and he said, and it wouldn't take that much more to put people in space. He said this in the 1920s. People thought that was like utopian, like Neptune, like not
Mm-hmm.
paranoid, but
Crazy. Yeah.
delusional. Yeah. that's the thing about Neptune. In its most extreme form, it can be paranoid or delusional, either one.
Or
One's
super
positive,
creative.
or the guy was actually seeing beyond what anybody else could, and he was absolutely right. Before this guy passed from this earth for this, and if you believe in reincarnation for this particular time around, he saw that them go to space within 40 years of when he said that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
People were
yeah.
in space. And
And
I
the
think we're at
planets,
a similar point now where someone who can imagine things, but imagine them in a very solid way, like Saturn, right? Saturn, like it's practical imagination. It's not that anything, any wild imagining you have can come true. It's if you can imagine Neptune with the power of Saturn, with practical, pragmatic, well considered imaginings, you can get in touch with something that might be like so far ahead of its time that you can be one of these people like this guy who saw the future, and you can begin to plant the seeds of the future now.
this is exactly the potent field. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. I said there is a very fragile, sensitive, but powerful vibration of potential. There is potential because Venus, she's the lady of matter. It's about matter.
Mm,
Venus is about, I'm here, I'm vibrating, she's a creatress. And
yeah.
so, in the midst of everything, and one last thing I wanted to say before we close, and thank you so much for these valuable insights. Planet Uranus is the planet that says sky is the limit. It's, just
Literally.
to, yeah, yeah, exactly. Tune in with my vibration without fear.
Pretty soon he's
You,
going to be going into Gemini too, that's going to be the
exactly.
last of these big movements of
Yes,
changing
utilize
time.
utilize the planetary energies, and of course, the challenge for us humans is not to go crazy, not to go into our ego, not to go into our fear. Is there? Saturn is the, as you said, Jupiter, Neptune. Imagine, vibrate, see. Saturn is like, let's put the building tools and create. Let's give it form. Let's give it structure. And Venus is there in her throne, right in her throne, saying, it's possible.
We can do this.
Everything,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can
We
do this.
can. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful, no, it's not without its challenges. There's a very tense aspect, and I don't think that's necessarily going to go away. Um, but one of the things that squares do is they sort of force us to make choices and to take action, even if we're not quite ready, and so, um, if you're
There is
not
a little push. There
yeah,
is
if you're
a
not
lot of
sure
push.
but I like what you said about like that it is still kind of a fragile energy, and so,
It's fragile.
and that first step might simply be engaging your imagination and thinking about what's possible in new ways. That might be the first step. It might be
And
enough.
returning to your own internal Venus, that Venus you said is introspective. We need to have is all the the goddesses asteroids, the hearth within.
Yeah,
That hearth within is to tender, is what we spoke before we even recorded, that you need to feed that fire within. You need to
yeah,
take care of that fire within. And that being said, we have to go. I'm so excited with what we shared today.
yeah. It's been
Um,
fun. Thanks for making the time with all that you're going through. I really appreciate it, Sylvia.
and for you as well. And I'm
Very
so
well.
excited I'm looking forward to your next two articles. Let's pick up our next election date and we'll share this wide.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's see.